Stark banner. Everyone will know and revere the name of Dr. Otto Octavius.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Marvel Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man episodes 3, 4, and 5 video. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get everything. There's a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references here. Probably no coincidence that we saw him debut in this suit on this show, and literally just yesterday we just saw the Fantastic Four trailer in the Future Foundation in that. Pretty easy to assume that live-action Tom Holland Spider-Man is going to meet the Fantastic Four for the first time during Avengers Doomsday. We are also in the middle of Super Bowl week. There's going to be a whole bunch of trailers coming in the next couple of days. Of course, I will do episode videos for it. And we have Invincible Season 3 episodes literally starting next. That'll be like my next big video. We might get a new Daredevil Born Again trailer sometime in the next week too, because we're about a month away from those episodes starting. But the episode 3 title was Secret Identity Crisis, a reference to the Spider-Man Identity Crisis storyline in the comics, when Norman Osborn frames Spider-Man for a crime and $1 million bounty is put on his head, so he has to create a bunch of different identities using all these different suits that they feature in this episode. In the comics, it was the Dusk, the Hornet, the Prodigy, and the Ricochet suits. They don't use the Ricochet suit during this episode, though. In the context of the series, this is also meant to be a reference to Spider-Man having a problem figuring out who Norman Osborn is turning him into versus who he wants to be as Spider-Man. This is basically the long-time complaint people had when Iron Man became his mentor in the MCU with the Tom Holland version. One of the biggest complaints that long-time hardcore Spider-Man fans had was that his Spider-Man movies felt more like Iron Man Jr. movies instead of Spider-Man movies. Heading into the new Tom Holland Spider-Man era with like Spider-Man 4, Spider-Man 5, Spider-Man 6, they really do have the opportunity to get back to core Spider-Man where he sheds a lot of his Iron Man technology. We will see how they deal with that because Spider-Man 4 is literally coming out between Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars and is supposed to have even more multiverse stuff in it than Spider-Man No Way Home did with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and the Sinister Six characters. The only big change that they make to this intro is adding Norman Osborn's comic book cover at the end. They start immediately after the cliffhanger last week where Norman Osborn learned his secret identity but sends him home saying that they'll continue the conversation later and he's not going to tell anybody. So at least for now, he does have noble intentions. There are a lot of questions about where all these villains are popping up, where they're getting the Oscorp tech. They reveal that that winds up being Dr. Octopus and he's gone rogue on his own, like he's not working with Norman Osborn on this. But I do think long-term, this will turn into a darker relationship and Spider-Man will split, like he'll butt heads with Norman Osborn and they'll eventually become enemies like the comics. Because I think we're all expecting long-term something is going to happen to Norman Osborn. Either he's going to be twisted by the Goblin Serum, but he will eventually become a version of comic book Green Goblin. But at least for right now, the major villain of the series is actually meant to be Dr. Octopus. He's like the big bad that's pulling strings on all these lesser villains that he's facing these first couple episodes. So if they go full Sinister Six on the show, and I think they are building up towards the Sinister Six team up, Dr. Octopus is probably going to put that together on his own, at least at first. Maybe Norman Osborn eventually tries to take advantage of that though. However many seasons the show winds up running, ultimately I think we're all expecting Norman Osborn to become the actual big bad of the entire series, just maybe not in season 1. He winds up going to play games with Nico. The handheld consoles they're playing makes me think that these are references to either Nintendo Switches or their Steam Decks. 15-year-old Peter Parker would probably be a total Nintendo fan. There were some video game references like this during X-Men 97 in Jubilee's room. Her console was kind of a mix of 90s consoles because that show takes place in the late 90s, so hers was like a combination of the Sega Genesis and the original Super Nintendo called a Motendo for Mojo World. They're starting to tease more of Nico's comic book origin story too, and her getting comic book powers. We see a picture of her parents in the background, but we learn that she's living in a foster home, so something happened to her parents at some point. And later in the series, we also find out that her parents are on her phone's wallpaper screen. Later when she grabs the necklace that she's been wearing this whole time on the show, I also think that's a reference to her comic book powers. There are a couple references in later episodes too that she also says, what if we were walking around in comic book suits, having powers, having to register for the Superhero Act? Lot of Captain America Civil War references going on in this episode with the Avengers. But also the irony being that Nico eventually gets powers in the comics and she would have to register. When he goes to have dinner with Norman Osborn, that giant picture of the Brooklyn Bridge feels like a reference to the events of Captain America Civil War, where he and Captain America referred to each other as Brooklyn and Queens because that's where both of them are from. But because his choices are different, things are different in this universe, he's not part of the airport battle during Captain America Civil War. Him eating the whole menu is also meant to be a joke about his metabolism as Spider-Man, so he gains these super attributes like he's way stronger than Captain America, for instance, but his body burns crazy calories to do all this. When they joke saying that he should have just said that he was friends with Spider-Man, that's something that all the live-action versions of Spider-Man, comic book Spider-Man have said in the past. Even Tony Stark used that excuse in the comics too. That whole joke in the classic comics is that Iron Man was Tony Stark's bodyguard. That was the lie that he would tell everyone. But then they made the very famous move, this was talked about so much at the time, this big deal, where at the end of the Iron Man movie, he just gave away his secret identity. Like, we're not gonna do that, secret identities aren't a thing, until they were again when you get to like the Spider-Man movies. Then they kind of undid that with Mysterio's video, then he redid it with the spell, and we're heading into Spider-Man 4, where he's basically going to abandon the persona of Peter Parker and just be Spider-Man 24/7. They actually said that's kind of where Spider-Man 4 picks up, is with Peter just trying to be Spider-Man all the time now. He's not even thinking about being Peter Parker anymore. Norman Osborn reveals all the other kids that he hired with Peter as part of that group of 4, with him trying to suss out who Spider-Man was. He thought it could be one of those 4. The other joke being that all the others wind up becoming comic book superheroes in their own right, getting their own powers. We will see how they handle all those origin stories or don't handle them on the show. I don't expect them to do every single comic book Easter egg, but usually when they introduce a big character like Amadeus Cho, it'd be weird if they didn't turn him into one of the comic book personas that he becomes. When he references upgrading Spider-Man's suit and putting a drone in it, that's actually similar to the one that Iron Man put in his Homecoming suit. He references Captain America, he tells a version of the Great Power, Great Responsibility speech. Norman Osborn won't let him quit like Nico told him to quit his job at Oscorp. It's not going to end well for him, which is true. Like, long term, she's actually correct about that. He's going to wind up having to quit because something terrible is probably going to happen that will cause a big rift between him and Norman Osborn, and then they'll turn into enemies eventually. Then we meet the next 2 villains on the show. From the Spider-Man comics, this one is Speed Demon with the super speed boots, and his girlfriend is Tarantula from the comics, who has gauntlets to give her those powers from the comics. All the villains on the show so far have been mechanical, technology-based villains. Later we find out the person that they're talking to on the phone that's building all this gear for them is Dr. Octopus in a very comic book accurate suit, played by Hugh Dancy, who's also from the Hannibal show, with Hannibal Lecter being played by Mads Mikkelsen, who was also Caecilius in the Marvel movies, so the circle of Easter eggs is now complete. Love the whole mechanical dumpster twist. The way that they're presenting all this is that all the armor, the weapons that he's building are Oscorp based, so I'm assuming that Dr. Octopus used to, at one point, work for Oscorp, then got fired, and has just been stealing parts from them to build all this stuff. So Norman Osborn isn't helping him or anything like that right now. But I think part of the idea is because during the episode, Norman Osborn sees his logo, like he sees his own company logo on some of their gear, and I think he's going to figure out who's behind this, and he's going to try and use that to his advantage long term. Probably to build all of his own goblin armor eventually. When Peter picks up the camera at his house, it's a reference to his job at the Daily Bugle, taking pictures of Spider-Man essentially, which he winds up using later, like he starts to use the camera, but the way they explain on the show is the camera used to belong to Uncle Ben, and most of the stuff that Aunt May is thinking about selling are old things that belonged to Uncle Ben before he died. There have been a lot of theories about what happened to Uncle Ben on the show. I think that he just died before the events of the series picked up. But the whole idea is that them needing money super bad is his motivation to accept the money from Norman Osborn and continue working with him, which is obviously going to long-term be a bad situation for him. That's part of the irony, like everything that Nico is saying is basically right. She makes a joke about him being the only one to actually use the sewing machine, and that was to create his homemade suit. Back at school, when Lonnie celebrates doing well because of Peter's help and him also not having any money, this is all meant to parallel Peter's arc with him falling in with the gang the way that Peter falls in with Norman Osborn. Both situations that will end badly for both of them. But I think what they tried to do is sort of establish this friendship between the two of them so that when Tombstone, he gets his Tombstone origin in these next couple of episodes, winds up on the wrong side of the law, Spider-Man will have to try and stop him, and that'll be their big rift. So Lonnie on the show will be a little bit more like his Bucky to the Captain America relationship there. Like he'll become his Winter Soldier that he regrets, like a person that he's trying to save who's doing all these evil things. So Lonnie is meant to be one of the big tragic villains of the show. But part of the idea is that he winds up falling in with that gang because he's trying to save his little brother. Speed Demon and Tarantula use their gear to steal from the jewelry store, and Spider-Man has his first 2-on-1 fight, but he's still in his homemade suit when he does this. When he makes the Spider Granny joke, that feels like a Madam Web reference, the older comic book version of Madam Web, or like if you talk about the Spider-Man 1990 series, that version of Madam Web. When we meet the gang leader, Big Donovan is a comic book character. He's a Luke Cage villain from the comics, and they're in Harlem right now, so that makes me think that Luke Cage could always show up on this show in animated form. We're actually getting the Daredevil Born Again episodes in a couple weeks. Luke Cage Easter eggs are all over that, making me think that most of the Defenders will come back eventually. We've already gotten direct references to some of them, like Punisher we know is coming back. Jessica Jones I think is meant to be the next one. But I think legit, Kevin Feige is trying to bring all the Defenders from the Netflix shows back. We will see how they invoke all that stuff during the animated series here, because we know that Daredevil is being played by Charlie Cox during this, and he'll be here in a couple episodes. So if he's here, maybe some of the other Defenders are too. One of the other ironic twists here too is that Big Donovan eventually wound up working for Tombstone's crew when Tombstone came to power in the comics, so part of the idea is that Lonnie gets his Tombstone origin in this episode. Long term, I think they're teasing that he becomes one of the big gang leaders in the city. When Norman Osborn starts to figure out who's stealing his technology, I think what they're also teasing here is part of the storyline from the Spider-Man games, Marvel Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, where Dr. Octopus used to be an employee of Norman Osborn's. Something bad went down between them, Dr. Octopus turns into a villain, then eventually, long-term, Norman Osborn will turn into a villain. That'll probably wind up happening in the third Spider-Man game eventually too. Moving on to episode 4, it's called Big Time. That's a reference to the Spider-Man Big Time storyline from the comics in the 2010s. That was when he began working at Horizon Labs, which in the context of this episode is probably just a reference for his internship at Oscorp, where he begins the episode giving the presentation on his project. This time during the intro, they had the comic book cover of him in the black suit, which in the context of the episode is the Dusk suit. But on the screen here, it looks a little bit like the black suit from the comics, like the symbiote suit. Big reminder that we also had a symbiote in episode 1 that will eventually come back at some point. Peter's whole presentation here is on them trying to replicate Tony Stark's arc reactor technology. The Iditarod is the literal famous sled dog race that he references because he's making the references to whipping them all into shape like sled dogs. Then on the way to see all the upgrades that Norman Osborn has for all the special suits that he created for him, he bumps into Harry. Notice on the wall next to the Captain America picture too, the other person that Norman Osborn is shaking hands with is King T'Chaka, former Black Panther, and we find out just got killed during the events of Captain America Civil War like the movies. So this also means that T'Challa has been Black Panther for a little while when the events of this episode are happening. Like Captain America Civil War, the airport battle, which they reference right after this, has just happened. The Avengers have split up, and Captain America, Bucky, half of the others have turned into the Secret Avengers. Really good way to help you chart the timeline of when things are taking place relative to the Marvel movies. When Harry jokes that Peter can always outrun his father, Norman Osborn, that's also meant to be a Spider-Man versus Green Goblin reference. He will definitely not outrun him. There's a couple different references here when they're talking about the Sokovia Accords too. They talk about the Superhero Registration Act, which is what they did in the comics with the Marvel version of Civil War, which obviously was very different than Captain America Civil War, but kind of the same idea and principle that all superheroes had to register. When he mentions his new Secret Projects division, that's meant to be a reference to him eventually using them to create his Goblin armor too, like all the stuff that he'll use as Green Goblin. But the whole comp here is a little bit like the Iron Spider that Iron Man developed for him at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, where he reveals it inside that special chamber. He shows him the drawings that he's been making of a very comic book accurate version of his blue and red suit. That was actually the second Spider-Man suit in the comics that he got during Amazing Spider-Man #1 when he was with the Fantastic Four. We literally just got that brand new Fantastic Four trailer, so it'll be interesting to see Spider-Man meet the Fantastic Four in live action in Avengers Doomsday. He winds up giving Spider-Man a whole bunch of different suits, starting with the Prodigy suit from the comics. The Thor reference is because of the cape, which they make a big joke about later. He talks about not being worthy. Spider-Man actually has wielded Thor's hammer in the comics. That same gang of kids that tried to rob Harry before steals a purse from an old woman. He tries to take them out in the Prodigy suit, winds up getting caught in his cape, and that feels like a big Incredibles reference. This is why you don't use capes.
No capes!
I would not be surprised if there's a joke about Superman wearing a cape during the new Superman movie too, where like one of the other people makes a reference to that, like, why are you wearing a cape, dude? Then Peter tries the Hornet suit from the comics, which also goes hilariously wrong. And we go back to Lonnie's gang storyline. They mention the Scorpions are the rival gang led by Mac Gargan, comic book Scorpion. The woman guarding the door, his second in command, Carmilla Black, winds up becoming another version of the Scorpion, taking the mantle from Mac Gargan. When Big Donnie says that Mac Gargan's big thing used to be finding people for a living and he was very good at it, that feels like a reference to Dr. Octopus making a full Scorpion suit for Mac Gargan eventually, and he'll use that to go after both Spider-Man and Lonnie eventually. Peter then tries out the Dusk suit, which winds up being way too scary, scaring a whole bunch of little kids because it's too hardcore, leading them to create the Future Foundation-looking suit, which they called the Oscorp suit on the show. Like I said, bit of an irony here because we just saw the Fantastic Four, and they used the term Future Foundation in that trailer. We will see if Spider-Man ever winds up doing any kind of Future Foundation stuff or teaming up with the Fantastic Four in the Spider-Man movies, but my guess is they'll just leave that for a lot of the Avengers movies. They both start talking about the events of the first Avengers movie with Thanos' attack in the Chitauri, basically explaining that Norman Osborn was inspired by Thanos' attack to develop all these weapons and technology that caused him to want to develop all this stuff. He mentions the Hulk saying gamma-fueled rampage. Johannesburg with the Hulk article is meant to be a reference to the events of Avengers Age of Ultron in the Iron Man fight. He also then references a rogue AI that they themselves created, which is an Ultron reference. On his other computer screen, the bombing is from the death of King T'Chaka during the events of Captain America Civil War. The Lagos event is when Scarlet Witch accidentally killed all those people, leading to the Sokovia Accords. So that means in this universe that Scarlet Witch exists and Quicksilver has already died. Then when he takes the new Future Foundation suit, swinging around, attaching to the building like this, like he lands perfectly, it's meant to be a comp to this scene from Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 3 when he was wearing the symbiote suit. The other connotation you could take from this is that his relationship with Norman Osborn in the animated show is a way darker relationship, kind of like Tobey Maguire during Spider-Man 3 with the symbiote, a very dark period in his life. Then we meet the next batch of villains from the Spider-Man comics. So this is Rhino driving the car, the Mohawk girl is Unicorn, the other girl, Roxana Volkov, is from the comics, but I think she's a twist on a comic book character. And this guy with the beard is meant to be a version of Chameleon, who we just actually saw during the Kraven movie. And because of the big reveal at the end of the episode, no surprise, they will probably also wind up getting a lot of their gear, like the Rhino gear and everything else, from Dr. Octopus eventually. Spider-Man uses his brand new suit to save everybody from the flames. They also transition to a very comic booky looking video frame, like you're watching a comic book just moving inside the frames. When he calls him amazing, that's an Amazing Spider-Man comic book reference. Peter accidentally then reveals his identity to Harry, setting up their closer friendship like the comics. And they end on the big Dr. Octopus reveal, pushing into episode 5, which was titled The Unicorn Unleashed, a reference to her getting her unicorn comic book powers and trying to rescue her team from jail. This time during the intro, they use that comic book frame of him in the white suit. We finally get a much bigger scene with Dr. Octopus. I'm assuming by now, because he's wearing that comic book suit, he's probably already created his 8 mechanical arms. He's just not wearing them right now. He explains his whole mission here is to become a greater person than Tony Stark, Iron Man, Bruce Banner, Hulk, Norman Osborn. He basically wants to be recognized as the superior human on Earth. His assistant, also big Easter egg, is meant to be Leapfrog from the comics, a character that they featured during the She-Hulk series during the Daredevil episode. Pretty easy assumption to make, like I said, that he'll be the one to form the Sinister Six on the show, and they'll be technology-based versions of the characters. Harry Osborn asked to become Peter's dude at the desk, which is meant to be a Ned Leeds man in the chair reference during the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. The way the showrunner explained it too is that this version of Peter will never meet Ned Leeds or MJ, like they just don't exist in this universe. It kind of looks like the car that Harry is driving is a reference to an Audi R8, which is the car that Iron Man drove in all the Marvel movies for a long time. We also find out that one of Peter's teachers here, who's kind of fangirling on his friendship with Harry, is also one of the dudes that he just saved from the car fire in the last episode. Zoom and enhance, in the background of his class, one of the other kids is also reading the Amazing Fantasy comic book, and it looks like the issue he's reading is number 14, the same one that Peter was reading in episode 1, the issue before Spider-Man debuted, which he was reading right before he got his powers. This girl that Harry is taking the picture with on Instagram here is Luna Snow, who's been getting a whole bunch of hype recently because of Marvel Rivals. When Nico says he'll pursue a political path in 20 years and he'll win because of all of his money, Harry Osborn actually did that in the comics, backed by his father's money. Her joining the revolution against him is also a reference to her becoming a comic book superhero and getting powers. Lonnie winds up getting in super big trouble for skipping practice for his gang, and also winds up skipping out on practice again. He'll probably get kicked off the team, slowly pushing him more and more towards his Tombstone identity. But also his football coach is meant to be the super pro character from the Marvel comics who also did cross over with Spider-Man. Nico and Peter talk about the Avengers splitting up and which side they support. She tries to take a more moderate approach, saying that she didn't really agree with Iron Man and she doesn't also agree with Captain America either, but Peter is meant to be a Captain America stan. This is just a little play on the way they marketed the Captain America Civil War movie. They did the same thing for the comic book version of the event, where it's like, pick your side, Team Iron Man or Team Captain America. Which side are you? Part of the irony here of her wanting all super people to register and joking about them both getting super suits and running around being superheroes is that she will eventually get superpowers and wear a super suit going around helping people. We will see when that happens on the show. I'm guessing maybe like a end of season 1, season 2 kind of reveal. She makes a Wizard of Oz reference when talking about Harry, Wicked Witch of the West also because she also gets magic-based powers. Lonnie and his gang wind up having their big war with the Scorpions gang. They make a whole bunch more Captain America Civil War references. We find out that Harry is also a Captain America fan and thinks that Spider-Man needs more color in his white suit, more red and blue like Captain America, but also I think that's a bit of a reference to his classic red and blue comic book suit too. Like, you should make a suit that looks more like your classic comic book suit. When he winds up floating the Captain America clone conspiracy theory, that's actually a real thing. In the comics, Captain America did have multiple clones. Unicorn then uses her new gear to break her team out of jail. They make a Rhino reference because obviously the Rhino will turn into comic book Rhino eventually before she names herself Unicorn, her name in the comics. During the fight, Spider-Man spares his life, who then repays the favor. I think in the future, this is meant to set up the idea that once he starts fighting Dr. Octopus, maybe Dr. Octopus puts together Sinister Six, one of those villain characters will be honorable and help Spider-Man stop Dr. Octopus, because at some point he will also help one of them, showing them mercy. Then we finally get the bigger scene with Mac Gargan Scorpion, who hasn't become full Scorpion yet. He's going to be a technology-based villain, eventually probably teaming up with Dr. Octopus, like he's going to pay him a whole bunch of money and get his Scorpion gear. When Spider-Man says, "Are you a distant cousin of the Hulk?" that's meant to be a She-Hulk reference because Unicorn is very tall and very muscular. Lonnie then saves Big Donnie from being killed by Scorpion, who stabs him with his knife, earning him his Tombstone name from the comics, sort of setting him on that path. Rhino then mentions Iron Man and the Avengers showing up to stop them. That's what he meant when he said Iron Man and his friends showing up. Technically, it's only half of his friends now because the Avengers split up. They'll also probably use this to set up a rematch between Spider-Man and Rhino when he gets his full Rhino gear from Dr. Octopus. Peter then meets Nico at the movies and brings Harry along. Nico gets a little bit jealous, thinking that Peter's probably going to abandon her for more famous friends, which he's probably not. This is just leading to him bringing her into Team Spider-Man and her learning his secret. But they keep teasing more of her comic book origin story, so we'll see how quickly that winds up developing in the background. There's a lot of stuff going on in the show right now. During the end credits this time, they had scenes of Scorpion, now that he's a bigger part of the show, in their gang war with Lonnie and the coach too. But there's a bunch of stuff going on. They're dropping 3 episodes at once, and it'll be the same thing next week too, with episodes 6, 7, and 8 next week. So if there's anything you spotted in these episodes that it didn't talk about in the video or big Easter eggs or references, just let me know in the comments below. There is a ton of stuff happening this week. We should get a new Daredevil Born Again trailer probably next week, episodes for that in a few weeks like I said, and Super Bowl trailers. I think we're actually supposed to see Sentry in his full comic book suit in that next Thunderbolt trailer during the Super Bowl, so my video for that will post Sunday night. There's also supposed to be some kind of new Superman footage or a new trailer. We are eating good right now. There is so much stuff happening this week. I'll try to do videos for everything. Really big reminder that Invincible Season 3 is starting. My episodes 1 through 3 video will post Thursday morning, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. Click here for that video. I'll update the link as soon as I post it, and click here for all my Fantastic Four trailer videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.